The first item on our agenda this evening is a data report with Zach Conrad. Thank you very much.
Guys, Zach Conrad, Executive Director of Research, Evaluation, and Accountability. Tonight we'll be going over some academic data, specifically the District Common Assessment that we completed last month in January. So just to give you a little summary, this was our first attempt at a district-wide common assessment. We had some bumps in the road, a couple hiccups. Because of certain constraints, we focused in on our board goals of third grade ELA and eighth grade math, with the nuance that we had the ability to do sixth and seventh grade math as well, so that we can start tracking that data over time. So we were able to learn quite a few lessons there. There were some communication lessons that we learned, and structurally we were able to meet with a few groups to see how things would change moving forward with platform and rollout. So we were able to, I think, really blueprint a good plan moving forward. We were able to look at the items and do the reliability analysis on the items to make sure that we could select the best items moving forward, to give our teachers confidence in the assessment that we roll out, but also to be able to report to their community reliable information. Now, our main purpose of this was to get standard level data to our teachers. Currently, we have lots of assessments out there that don't necessarily fill that niche of standards level data. And so that's what we're really striving for with this common assessment.
And Zach, just to clarify, when you say standards level data, you're talking about data that is showing how our students are doing in relation to the state learning standards, right?
Yes,
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Just
Clarification.
sorry.
And so often our state assessment is standards driven. It's designed that way, but it's very high level, and it doesn't necessarily diagnose like what standards students are necessarily struggling with compared to others. It's just overall math or overall reading. And we have a few other assessments that are that way. We also have one assessment that is skills-based, and so we get at the small kernel of learning, but it's not necessarily tied to a standard, it's a skill. And so teachers, well, this state is really organized in a way all states are with standards. So our state school board approves standards. These are the academic goals that every student should learn these standards by the end of a grade level. They then give us money and hold us accountable according to these standards. These standards are measured by the state assessment at the end of a school year. And so we see lots of reports from the state to the feds, to the U.S. Department of Education around standards and how well we've done on standards. So we think it's really important that we provide teachers and students with that information, that data, because they are teaching standards and the students are learning standards. So we need to provide them the data around the standards on what students may or may not need help on. And so we started by building this. We were determining what standards through the scope and sequence have been taught up to this point in the school year. We then aligned what has been taught to the Kansas standards and what we can pull out of the mini assessments within the KITE platform. So once we were able to align all of that, I put together forms or tests at each of the grade levels, and I'll give you an example of what this looks like, and then we rolled it out. So here's a table of specifications. This is what the state tells us is going to be on the state assessment and how it's broken down. So these aren't standards, these are domains. And what we see here is writing has two subdomains, text types and purposes and language and writing, which make up approximately 35 to 40% of the state assessment. So this is a way for us to guide our instruction in the classroom, but It's not very specific, and when you get the state assessment score back, it's only over reading. It's not these domains that it reports back at. So with that, we took this table of specification to know what we're going to be assessed on, and the performance level descriptors describe what level of rigor, what the student will be expected to do or to produce, what they'll know, so that we're able to align items that look like, okay, this is performance level 4 items. Here's 3, here's 2. So I went through all the available assessments within KITE. KITE is the state platform for the state assessment. And what they have in there is they have these mini assessments, what they call them. And we could see here that in listening, there's 3 assessments there. They cover those standards. Reading informational text, there's 4 assessments there, and it's those standards. Same with reading literature and writing. So I looked at our standards that we had taught up to this point with the scope and sequence, and I did this for 3rd grade, 6th grade, 7th, and 8th grade. And then I selected assessments to build one bigger test for us to take across the district. So for reading, we selected tornado safety, and those are the standards that were associated with it. For reading literature, Arrow in the Song, and then one of the text types and purposes, set 1, and the associated standards. So with this, we got the results back. We analyzed the data so that we could see and provide that feedback to teachers and schools where students were shaking out, so that we can intervene now instead of receiving this data at the very end of the school year when school's over. And so we wanted to give them a little more time for intervention. And so we could see 3rd grade reading, total test. These tests are broken down. Like I said, the 3rd grade had those 3 standards on it. So this is all 3 standards together, but we also broke them out separately. So in 6th grade, there were 5 standards on it. In 7th grade, there was 4 standards, and then 8th grade, there was 3 standards.
So do those correspond to levels 2, 3, and 4? The mastery, near mastery, and the
Yes, so the way that I set the cuts, it was in relation to historical data. This will be a lot more accurate once they do take the state assessment, and then I can line it up a little more appropriately.
Okay.
But I took historical data, and that the mastery cut really aligns with performance level 4. Your near mastery is that 2 to 3. It's somewhere in there. They can go either way. And right now, we have time to ensure that they go to the 3, the performance level 3 category. And then the remediation tends to be performance level 1.
Okay.
So we have some work to do there.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you.
So we wanted to review kind of our goal, where we are and how we're going to progress towards that goal. So we wanted to pull the Kansas Assessment Program data. This is the end of year assessment that all students take 3 through 8 and 10th grade. So the way that the state has it set up, this is 3rd grade CAP English Language Arts data, 2018. You could see level 1 and level 2, according to the way that we reported back to the feds, not proficient. Performance categories 3 and 4 are proficient. And those are the titles next to it below, approaching, meets, and exceeds. So you can see over the last 2 years, we have moved 1% of students over to the proficient category. But this is how we set our goal. We'd like to see more movement over to the proficient categories of 3 and 4. So what we want to provide as a district are these common assessments that align to the standards so that teachers can go back in and remediate as necessary and intervene where appropriate to make sure that kids are receiving instruction on the standards. So these are the standards that were on the Common Assessment, and there's a lot of terminology around it, a lot of abbreviations, but this is what the teachers are required to teach and students are required to learn, standards. And these are the state standards and what they're asking students to be able to do. And that was reading literature. Here's text types and purposes. And the last slide for this is the reading informational text. So here was our results. And we can see the third grade reading informational text has the largest portion of students in the mastery category and the fewest students in the remediation category. This holds some truth for us that we're able to validate that because we know that our curriculum leans heavy on the reading informational text. Our standards tend to lean on informational text. That tends to be the tougher of the standards. And so we have moved in that direction. So we can see that instructional practices are showing up here to validate some of the data. But it also shows that we have to make sure that it's not at the expense, not at the total expense of other standards that they are going to be measured on. And so this provides, I think, us as a district a way to look at our curriculum, look at some of the professional development we offer to make sure that students are receiving that balance in their standards. We also want to look at Ames Web. Now, Ames Web measures lower level skills that lead into standards, but they're very discrete skills. And so what you see here is low, medium, and high, and the definition is low risk in not meeting the benchmark. So they have a above 80% probability of meeting that benchmark. And then medium risk and high risk. So the category we'd like all students to be in is the low risk category, or low on these charts. So this is this year's data, and we're looking at how we're progressing by the time they get to third grade. So coming into us, they're about 47% in kindergarten are in that low risk category, and we can see each year we get more and more students in the low risk category. Now looking at third grade, we see that over the last couple of years, we do have a good portion of our students, 3/4 of our students, that have mastered those skills, those underlying skills to be able to access the standards. We still have about 1/4 of our students that still need some more additional time and work with those low-level skills before they can even access the standards. But a good portion of our kids are there. They have those low-level skills. We need to translate that into ensuring that they have access to those standards and getting them to the point of scoring proficient on the state assessment. So that's kind of where the Common Assessment fits in. So we have the low-level skills. We know that you got those. Let's make sure that we're teaching to a rigorous level, teaching to the standards so that the outcome at the end, we can see that growth. So we did the same thing with 6th grade. Here's the standards that we measured there. And we see the common assessment results, the district common assessment results. Seventh grade, the standards, and then the results there. Now again, as this was the first time we rolled this out and we were following scope and sequence, there are a lot of variables that go into why some of these are a little lower than others. Strategic thinking and reasoning is a standard in there that is supposed to be woven throughout all of mathematics. And sometimes those questions tend to be very specific, maybe around geometry that they haven't gotten to yet. And so although it's an overarching theme that should be woven throughout, sometimes the questions come off as very specific and not, they haven't had an opportunity to learn that quite yet. So there's just a lot of variables that go into that, but those are conversations that we can have as a district going back to those buildings and going back to the teachers to say, hey, do we need professional development here? Is it a curricular issue? What's going on? So it allows us to see it and to address it. And again, we want to just show the CAP data, the 8th grade math CAP data, to show where we are currently and where we'd like to be, and are we going to be able to make progress to it. We see a significant more number of students that are not proficient in 8th grade math. And those numbers have stayed relatively stable over the last couple of years. So here's the common assessment data. One of the things that we've been able to see is the consistency with our district common assessment results and the state assessment results. Mastery on the common assessment has been close to the proficiency levels of the state assessment. Another piece of validity evidence that we can intervene hopefully earlier, and we have solid data, and we can watch that change before we get to the summative point where they take the end of level and that's it. They move on. We wanted to include map data over the last 3 years. So this is fall data, and so we assume or we expect that teachers would have received this data in the fall, that they'd screen their kiddos in the fall, and they take that information and they do something with it. And we have seen that this has stayed rather stagnant over the 3-year period. And again, I think it's another call to action from the district to provide them with the information at the standards level that's actionable, that is instructionally useful and sensitive, so that teachers have that data at their fingertips and can use it. Now, I did want to give you guys an example of how we send this data out.
Before you do that, do you want to pause for questions from board members?
No, he answered my question about the fall data, so thank you.
Okay. So we're reminded of our outcomes. A couple of our outcomes in our strategic plan is increased third grade literacy, increased literacy by third grade, right? And so that was the rationale for including kindergarten, first and second. And then in addition, increase math literacy by 8th grade. And so we can't wait until 8th grade to address that. So we're looking at 6th, 7th, and 8th. And so I've often said we have to have like a laser-like focus on our instruction, but most importantly, a laser-like focus and a pulse, I guess you would say, on the performance of our students. I tell the team often that hope is not a strategy. And so when we're giving the assessment in the spring, we can't sit and say, I hope our students do well, you know. And so at this point, giving the data from our common formative assessments, we know where we need to continue to focus our efforts as it relates to those particular standards. And so state assessment data, that's that autopsy data. We get that back in June. There's nothing we can do about that, but look at it and maybe we can make some curricular implications from that, but the students are going on to the next grade. Here, we're giving our students a kind of like a checkup. You know, we're checking the pulse of our students, and we're checking the pulse of our instruction. And so with this, and he'll talk about this in a moment, some action steps, what we're planning on doing going back to this data. So yes, we were up 1 percentage point in terms of the students scoring level 3 and 4 in math, and up 3 percentage points in terms of students scoring in 8th grade math, but we have to move at a much more rapid pace. And by looking at this common formative assessment data, they're again able to identify those areas that we need to continuously focus on.
There are additional questions?
With the assessments that you put together, did you get any feedback from the teachers themselves or the curriculum department on this format of them? Did they have any feedback to make them better or worse, to change them at all, or? did they like
Absolutely.
them?
Yep, and so we got feedback from our departments and from a couple teacher groups, learning coaches, and unfortunately, because of the format this year, because we were going through KITE, we couldn't alter the items, and so we took what was there, and these are released items from the state assessment, and we really had to use them. We didn't have a platform outside of them that we could have used. But moving forward, we will have that platform where we will be able to create those items. And for this purpose, it was really productive because we got those results back and we could see which items functioned well based on some of those statistics and which ones didn't. But that'll help us when we start developing our own items to have guides to say, okay, these items worked really well. They provide us with a lot of information and these didn't. So we can start to toss those and build new ones. So moving forward, I think that we will have an assessment that is more robust, that includes more items, and that teachers are involved with creating instead of just having it done like that. So, yeah.
Dr. Lewis, I know that you mentioned before, especially when we think about English language learners and just like exposure to certain types of genres and texts and topics, I'm wondering how, like, the benefits or maybe the deficits of like having these similar things, but like, you know, how they have the passages and such, but more relative to, you know, like topics that our students are aware of and how they apply it to that. Like, will we see a significant difference, you know, or is that like too much info to where, you understand where I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, so these passages that were selected in KITE, as Zach mentioned, those are the ones we had to select from. But the beauty in this is that we're in the middle of, well, on the other hot side of the half of the year, that we haven't taken the assessment yet. So what teachers are able to do is go back and kind of share the questions, to go back through the passages that were on the common formative assessments. They never can do that with the state assessment, but they can go back through the passages with the students and begin to identify any type of misconceptions in terms of what they thought the passage or the question was asking of them. As a result of that, by them seeing how the questions are, teachers are seeing how the questions are worded, now I can pull in some passages that are culturally relevant to the students that they're serving to, there again, still get that same practice in terms of identifying main idea or identifying types of characters or author's purpose, but now maybe with a more culturally relevant text.
Yes.
Is that what you're
Yes,
asking?
yes.
Okay.
You know, in Louisiana right now, for the last couple of years, has been trying to redesign their state assessment, and they were granted an innovative authority from the federal government to do this, specifically with ELA. Instead of doing cold reads, that they are throughout the school year, the students would be able to have a text that they would be working with all year long, and then being able to be assessed on it at the end. So they have somewhat of an innovative way to do that. I think it would be interesting for us to be able to use passages that students have been exposed to, because we know prior knowledge plays a lot into this, and get everybody on the same level of prior knowledge, and then have novel questions. And if we had two passages, one that we have common knowledge on, right? That they were able to build that prior knowledge up where everybody's on the same level, and then have items associated with that, and then also have a cold read, we'd be able to look at some comparison there and kind of tease out those variables of, is this prior knowledge? Are you just not accessing this because of your cultural background? So if we could do that, I think we could really get at the underlying issue there.
Yeah. I mean, that's just as simple as sometimes when, there's so many vocabulary words or synonyms for different words, and you will try to expose them to altogether, total, with some, and then they say just a slight difference of a word, and for some English language learners, it's just like, I don't even know what
Absolutely.
you're telling me. And it's definitely things that they've done before. So I like that idea of having a familiar and a cold and being able to compare.
So the skills that we want to ensure that our scholars are mastering, that they can apply to any
Yes.
passage.
Ultimately.
And so there again, once we're able to identify, what those standards are, now I can pull in some other text. And with the ultimate goal of being, it doesn't matter which text I put in front of my scholars, I know I've taught that skill or that standard to
Yes.
mastery, and they can definitely master that.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay. So we have chosen to go with a Data Studio, a reporting tool. So I uploaded some data, and this is mass data. You'll see over on the side where it says school and it's DCBA. This is sixth grade standard here, 6 EEB equations.
Can you make it a little bigger?
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. And so with this, we have all 4 of our middle schools listed there. And we have the questions associated with that standard. So we have EEB question 1, 2, 3. So on the assessment that the students took, there were, in 6th grade, 5 standards on it. But each question was aligned to a standard. And I'll say standard, it's actually technically a cluster because there's standards within those clusters. But they have access to now look at, okay, where did we as a school not do as well as other schools, and why was that? Is there something that we can learn from those other schools? And we can also filter. So if I want to look at students that were near mastery, so across the district we had 161. Oh, so I had to create a fake one so that we could hide the school. So let me fix this really quick so that we can, down.
Do we need to close our eyes?
No, you can watch, unless this is not important to you. Actually, I think that's the button I needed to push. Let's view it again, see if it works. Magic. So now I'm seeing all the students who are near mastery, who are just right there on the threshold of going either direction. And I can look at the questions, okay, which ones did they miss? How can I group them? And how can we help remediate or intervene at this point in time? So with this, you can also drill down. So if I was to select B, we can drill down and we can look at what students and what questions were missed. So if I look at just question 5 and sort on it, let's sort the other way. So we could see a large portion of those students missed question 5. So what am I going to do as an instructor to go back in and shore it up? So one of the other features that I'm continuing to build in is they have the option to come up and click on the standard, which should have popped them out to a different web page. And again, this is just an example. The real ones, it'll go to a new tab. So they can toggle back and forth. But in here, this is part of the Kansas Flipbooks. so they can look at the standard. When we look at that standard and what is included in there, it gives them examples of what it means. It breaks it down, but it also has some links to some other resources. And so the teacher can go in there and automatically have ideas of how to reteach this, maybe teach it differently. And those resources they don't have to go searching for. They're already built in here. And it goes through all of those standards. So, and there are links specifically just to that group, that cluster, so they don't have to go searching through all 500 pages of the flipbooks. It goes straight there. So we're hoping to give teachers access and data at their fingertips so that they can group students and intervene with them as quickly as possible, as close to instruction as possible, so that those students have an opportunity to really master the standards that they're supposed to master. We can also, over here, I've built in filters on the side. So if we wanted to look at, and the circles are that's real data. I just masked the schools. So what you're seeing here is 6th grade data. So if we looked at our Black African American students only, which we have 50 in here, we see that 12% mastered both the standard and also their totals, all of the standards put together in that total score. We have 72% that are in remediation, or 36%, compared to our white students, which is the typical comparison. We have 40% mastery here, 45% on the other standard. And we could do this with lunch status, so all teachers can really hopefully be able to dive in, building administrators can dive in, but we at a district level can really explore this data to know how we can best support them.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm going to say that was a significant difference when you clicked on
Absolutely.
the Black African American students compared to the white students, like alarming.
Mm-hmm.
What are we doing to address that?
So there's a number of things, and we have some action steps on here as well that we can jump to at this point. And first off, we need to identify those things. And that's our first step. We have tools. Giving the common assessment allows us to do that at the standard level. Now we have to go back to buildings and know how to support them to make sure those gaps are closing. And so we have a few action steps here. And within our roles, we have, I collect the data, I analyze the data, but I pass on the baton when it comes to dealing with the professional development and those things. So if it's okay with Darcy, to have her come up here. I hand the baton to Darcy more times than not, unfortunately. And so actually, I'm not sure.
Before
why.
you do that,
And Rick.
if you can answer my question. So I like what you did with the hyperlink where you can click on it and see what that looks like, what the standard looks like, what they should be able to do. Have you thought about even potentially seeing what they should have mastered the grade before, like incorporating that so that teachers can see, so that way they can probably see where the missing link potentially was, you know?
Yeah, so I've done that work where those standards are linked up to prior grade levels, and it tends to be a good solid link that you need these, but it gets unwieldy as you get further and further down because, by the time you get to 3rd grade, they need all of these standards to master that one. And so we can go like a couple grade levels back and link that up. Because in the future, if they're grouping students, they're going to need to know kind of where they are, what level they're in. And so we will continue to build that out. But tossing that on teachers all at once becomes a little difficult. So this is our first steps into this area. But we're going there.
Before Darcy comes up, can we take a look at the American Indian
Yes, yes, we can.
And so this is I'm sorry, go ahead. This is a perfect example of the beauty in, now the data is not gorgeous in terms of where we are right now, but the beauty in this process. So if you look at question 6, we see school A, 88% of the same Indian students mastered, Native students mastered, 88% mastered that on question 6 over on the end. And then look at school A, 36%. So a goal, as we continue to, I guess, beef up our professional learning communities within our schools, this district should also be one big professional learning community. Principals will have access to this data. So if I'm a principal, I'm going over to school C and say, what strategies, what resources did you use in order for your Native students to almost master that question? And so those are some action steps that we can take now, because there again, if this was state assessment data, it would have just been that, Erica, just alarming. It's nothing we can do until try to do better next year. But now, before they take the state assessment, we're able to look at this data, identify where the gaps are early on, and hopefully intervene.
And the state assessment data is not going to give you standard level feedback either, or even cluster level feedback. So this allows us to really pinpoint and hone in. I can't go back to teachers and say, hey, this student's at risk. They have so much to teach and so many standards to teach, it's very difficult to sort through all of that. So if I can sort through that for them, they can start to pinpoint and target and better intervene earlier.
Yes.
Okay, so we do have some action steps. I'm going to turn it over to Darcy. You want this slide first or the next one? First one it is.
Hi, Darcy Kraus, Elementary Director. First of all, I'm extremely excited because since Dr. Lewis came, we have been asking for standardized data so that our buildings can focus on the actual instruction and the coaching cycle versus digging deep. Because whenever I would go out previously to the buildings, and I think Rick would concur, we spent our time investing in how we were going to get the data, right? And now Zach has provided us a very systemic way of looking at it in a discrete manner that in my tenure here, we haven't had the privilege of using. So that's the first thing that I'm excited about. You've heard me talk a lot about those professional learning communities and how that is our systemic structure. It's kind of the nest, if you will, by how we are going to go about doing those pedagogical discussions. And that is what the big lift has been. That also, even though we've had collaboration, we haven't had that systemically at the elementary level in the time that I've been here. And to hear the difference in the collaboration and the conversations when we go out, it is a standard topic on both Rick and my agendas on our one-on-ones with the principals, and we talk about that trajectory. Now is the time that we get to actually layer that data component on it. So question number 2, how are we going to know if our students have mastered what we want them to learn, right? And then next, what are we going to do about it if they don't? And what are we going to do about it if they do? So our PLCs are providing that structure. The state planning guides are one of the components the state has for us this year that our teachers are actually layering into their work. And it shows models, and it shows an unpacking, if you will, a rubric. So if you master this standard and you're at a level 4, this is what your work looks like. This is the type of verbiage you will be seeing and utilizing. Same way with level 3, 2, and 1. And so before, our teachers didn't have that. It was kind of like Dr. Lewis said, it was kind of a shot in the dark, and you had one shot at it, and then good luck until next year. And then you had a different set of kids, right? So you were looking at data that was no longer applicable to the instructional cycle. So now, as we launch into this, we do have some time to tweak and shift. We're able to dig down into the standard level and look, if we have a class and 60% of them didn't get question 12, you better believe I'm going to go in and look at question 12. The principals, I sent this out Saturday night maybe, and I had 3 phone calls and I had 4 emails Sunday. They were so excited with being able to go in and look at this, and they immediately said, can we go to our teams? Dr. Lewis and the district PLC has said we want to develop, along with Dr. Besselow's help, an actual protocol that they can look at this so that when we talk to them, we can measure apples to apples, right, and oranges to oranges. Because if I go into Pinckney and they're looking at it one way, because there's all kinds of data protocols out there, and I'm going to Schwegler and they're looking at it separately, then we can't have those common conversations. And that is what has been so powerful in our PLCs, is actually utilizing that common language so that the principals can continue to build on each other's successes. So
So from a board perspective, and this may be a Zach question as much as anything, just to make him come back up. So from a board perspective then, with this data set, is really the next opportunity that we will have as a board to know whether these are improving will be the state assessment data?
So this year,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
We don't have plans to do this again this year.
Okay.
But in future years, we plan on doing it more frequently so that they're a little smaller, but also closer to in time of instruction.
Okay.
So they can adjust
Oh,
there.
all right. Thank you.
Probably a Darcy or Rick question. So I appreciated that you mentioned that this data helps principals identify what to do for those kids that have not mastered the content, but also what comes next when you have. Because I think one of the worries that I have, and I have had for a while, is that we rightly spend a lot of time talking about those kids who aren't getting it because we have to move them. We have to move them up. We have to make those charts for our students all look the same. But for those kids that have already reached mastery, we don't hardly ever talk about what are we doing for them. And I think we're doing them a disservice if we don't have a plan for that as well. So hopefully in our future action steps, that would be something that we will see more information about.
And I don't disagree at all. I would say with the 4 PLC questions, we're seeing, I'll speak elementary, but we're seeing more discussion about that than I ever have, even as a building principal. I totally agree. It was an afterthought. And now with that continuum of learning and them having to answer those 4 questions, and now even kind of to your point, Melissa, where it has the culturally sustainable resource tool that they are layering onto the text that they're reading, that also is allowing us to incorporate ancillary texts that before we were kind of skeptical about bringing in. So we are teaching to the standards and not the resource. The data, I laughed when Zach pulled it up, because as a teacher, teaching informational text, that's the hard lift, right? The lit, I'm like, what? Characters and story? But it speaks to our resource. That's what our resource has. So I don't find that remarkable at all. But again, having to go back and balance that on both ends. And it's going to be training the teachers. And this is our first year to really dive into that. You speak.
Yeah, I guess just reiterate, at the secondary level, that 4th PLC question about what are we doing for students who have already mastered it, we're talking about that more than we ever have. And I think that's a really good discussion to have, because our responsibility is to all students, right? And I had another thought. and I just lost it.
Well, we always talk about how the whole discussion around the achievement gap is that you close the gap while at the same time you continue to increase at the top. And
Raising.
we haven't been doing either one over the last couple of years especially. So,
You don't want to narrow the gap by bringing the top,
right,
Yeah.
so, no, I agree.
okay.
No, we have to continuously raise achievement level of all students and accelerate the ones at the bottom. But in order to do that, we have to know where our students are from a standards perspective.
And Anna rightfully reminded me, the fourth question is, what do we do if our students know the standard? I will tell you kind of anecdotally, today I happened to be at Woodlawn. We're doing our walkthroughs, typical, when we walk out. Rick and I always say, what are you thinking? Where do we go from here? And I will tell you, I was excited because it was a kindergarten classroom, and the principal said, it was a small group, and the principal said, she talked to me about remediation, but she said that little one on the end had sentence structure. So what they should have done here is X. And I didn't hear those conversations the last 2 years. So even the administrators, it is a cognizant point that's more on that front burner. So we'll just keep shoving. Keep shoving.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We also wanted, I want to make sure that the data that we give back is reliable data. And so when we say you've mastered this standard, it's not an opinion, but it is, in fact, we have reliability and validity evidence behind it. And so you can make those decisions and we can see those gaps, because we don't want to be in a position where we're advancing kids when they actually haven't mastered those standards, or saying that we've closed a gap when actually we've just lowered standards or expectations. And so it's really important that we do have that reliability data behind us to make sure that those are the correct decisions that we're making.
Hello, everyone. I just want to add that because I think when we start to look at data like this, that can raise up some concerns for the community or teachers that we're just going to be so narrowly focused on state assessments or testing, and that is not at all the end goal. Our goal is to look at our curriculum so that regardless of how our students are being assessed, that they will perform at a level that is expected. So I just wanted to go on record as saying that so that people won't think that we're going to be narrowly focused just on the state assessments and that's it. But that's why we're looking at our curriculum from a broad perspective and been driven by standards, so that those standards and the how it goes about, it doesn't mean that we're going to be teaching to a test. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Didn't we include a fifth question in that PLC? Didn't we include a fifth question?
The equity portion, it is not on the template this year, but well, I take that back. Some of the principals have added, but it is the whole, kind of like the strategic plan. The expectation is that it is embedded in every single question. And so what many of the principals have done has put a link to our culturally sustainable resource tool on the actual template, so that those 5 questions are always right there when they are looking and examining material.
Right.
And that fifth question is really making sure that we are not making decisions that will continue to contribute towards the disparity. So like when Erica asked the questions about we don't want to go and just track all of our African-American students into some remediation, because that could potentially lead to more disparities. So just being thoughtful about the decisions that we make and what the impact on our current disparities and marginalized students could possibly be. So all of that is what is hopefully will be driving the conversations in the PLCs.
And there are some schools in this district that it's doing some amazing things for our scholars in terms of raising achievement for all scholars. And so a part of this process is us learning from those schools, because ultimately we want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to, because when Erica asked to look at the black students, and Paula asked to look at the Native students, everyone kind of knew what the data would be, right? If you look at any school or school district around the country, you can pretty much know what the data is going to be. But the work that we will continue to do is work around eradicating that predictability of achievement by culturally responsive teaching, by talking about teaching strategies, by, there again, building those relationships to get to know the students, to know how to make this content relevant to our students, and making sure that our students are able to show up as their true, authentic selves in every single classroom, and we're not, and to make sure that we're not doing what Bettina Loves calls spirit murdering when they show up. But how can we make sure that we're honoring their culture, honoring all students? Because there are some students that are sitting at the top that are just still sitting there, and we're not doing a good job of honoring what they bring to the classroom. But if we do that, we'll see them rise, their academic achievement rise as well.
I thought of the thought that I lost earlier. We have to remember that this is new for us. This is new for our teachers. But Dr. Besselow caught me right before the board meeting, and she had spent some time with the middle school math leadership team, and she said that in talking about this and next steps, those teachers were extremely excited and looking forward to this new challenge and new ability to really look at how our students are doing in terms of mastering the state standards. So I was excited to hear that even though it's new, our teachers were really looking forward to it and motivated to be successful and move our students to the next steps.
This next slide actually deals a lot more, I think, with our AIMS data for our littles and some of those foundational skills. It is not news to the board that our resource was lacking in some of our phonics and phonological awareness. There wasn't a lot to it. And so we have backmapped a little bit and backfilled, and we have RAS. We also have Words Their Way coming in. We have done letters training, and we have a lot of resources coming forth with a new state, not resources, but a new directive from the state in regards to dyslexia and how they are going to basically retool the way in which we teach reading. And so our teachers will basically have a new mini course in how we're going to teach foundational skills. And we begin to roll that out on March 26th with a keynote, if you will, from Cynthia Hadeke. And then we have a team that has drawn out a plan for how we will go about, it is a pretty heavy lift, taking that into our elementary schools for academic year 2021. I'm not going to spend time reading that to you, but do you have any questions in regards to any of the bullet points?
I think, just make one last comment. I think what we've seen in the data, and I think Darcy and I can't remember who else you're working with, are beginning to meet with some early child care providers in making sure that our students come to us ready, because if you look at our data, around maybe 40% are ready when they enter kindergarten. So they're already starting, so a large percent of them are already starting behind. But how can we work with our community early childhood partners to make sure that transition, when they transition to our classrooms, that they're ready? And we have to continue to move with a little sense of urgency around our kindergarten, first grade curriculum.
The readiness skills. And our AIMS shows that our littles are coming in at a deficit already. First grade, it really kicks in. The good news is by second grade, they're starting to catch up, but golly, how much further could they be ahead if we didn't come in at such a deficit pace? And hopefully the new focus on phonics will really help us in that, reach that goal.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that work.
Thanks, Zach.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Anybody, everyone's good? Do you need a break? Yeah, she's supposed to be coming. I know we have our regular scheduled board meeting, but we're going to take at least 5 minutes to collect ourselves. Okay, thank you.
When you get to consent agenda, there's a change. And I highlighted with the new motion. Public comment form? Yes.
Oh, we have to, okay, let me make sure I get this right. Okay, glad we did that.
We now read this one. We're just adding this to whatever already on the consent agenda.
Oh, it wasn't on there already.
Right. The board and amend the consent agenda to add.
Thank you so much. You're welcome.
Who asked, was it you or who or somebody said something about don't put it on there because of the notes? And I went, I think you told me that.
Quick question. Sometimes I get a little talky.
Okay. Yes, then he can introduce.
Yeah. He's Harrell, not Harold. He's Harrell.
He's well, right.
Brittany is Harold. I was, I keep, my mind.
No, we can make the notes not show up there. No, it's okay.
Everything else got logged in and things working okay. All right.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. I don't know how I ended up getting the link to that, like saved on my desktop in the first, or bookmarks in the first place, but once I did it, that's like that's my go-to
Thank you.
spot for.
Blue. Actually, it's not turned. That looks a lot better.
Sorry I missed the,
No, it's okay.
Monday, what did,
So it was just, it was mostly like orienting, just updating about what's been going on, about the work on the,
So when it's glossy like this,
the operations manual?
Yeah. There was that, oh, okay.
that means
Yeah, we talked about the bullying cases for teachers.
Sorry. I'd like to call to order the February 10th, 2020 board meeting.
So there really wasn't a lot.
May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Move to approve.
second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
At this time, we have a special recognition with presented by Dr. Lewis,
Does he know?
Superintendent of Schools. And he knows. I was trying to be a little bit long with it. He is a special recognition of first student Lawrence Branch Manager Eric Allender.
Right.
Yes.
Well, he's not here tonight. He did call us today and let us know there was a scheduling conflict, so we will recognize and give the board an opportunity to meet our new first student transportation branch manager, Eric Arlander, so he will be back at our next board meeting. However, it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. James Polk, who will lead Quail Run Elementary School as its new principal starting July 1. Mr. Polk, can you come forward, please? Mr. Polk comes to us from Oak Grove Elementary School in Kansas City, Kansas, with a strong background in supporting teacher teams and examining student performance data. I saw you looking at the data we just presented, reflecting on effective instruction, effective teaching practices and interventions in helping diverse learners to improve their reading and math skills. We are happy to have you join our team. Mr. Polk, please just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, like Dr. Lewis shared, I am coming from the Turner School District in Kansas City, Kansas, where I've been a lead principal for the last 3 years. Prior to that, I was an assistant principal in the same district and then an administrative intern down in Gardner-Edgerton School District, where I also was in the classroom for about 5 years. And so I've got 2 young boys, and I'm very excited to come to Lawrence and take over Quail Run.
Yes.
Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We're also excited to welcome back Dr. Ann Hawks. She's coming back to the district. She was once at Liberty Memorial Central Middle School. She also previously served 2 years there as assistant principal and 5 years as a curriculum specialist for our district in 2007 through 2015, I think was your total span there. She is currently serving as an instructional coach at Eisenhower Middle School in Topeka, USD 501. Dr. Hawks, we're definitely glad that you're here and welcome back. For those who may not know you, you can kind of share a little bit about yourself.
Sure. When I left 6 years ago, I had 2 young kids, and now they're 19 and 14, bigger than me. I have been doing lots of different jobs from, I guess, 2001 until now. This is my 19th year in education. I've been district administrator, building administrator, assistant principal, and I could not be more thrilled to be back at Liberty Memorial Central Middle School. I was telling someone earlier I have my pullover with my Mustang on it still from when I was an AP, and I'm excited to get that out. But it's a very special place, and I'm just thrilled to be back.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I'm glad to have you.
Thank you. It's the report of the board of the president, I don't really have anything to report. I attended negotiations meeting, and that's about as far as I can get into that. But, so yeah, that's all I have. Not right. Hey, okay, so I will move that to the report of the superintendent.
Okay, I have several exciting things to share. We announced last week the planned retirement of Brian McCaffrey, of Broken Arrow Elementary School principal. Brian has served in public education for 30 years, 24 years in our district, including 14 years at Broken Arrow Elementary School. Definitely thank Brian for his number of years of service to not only public education, but definitely to Lawrence Public Schools. While he will finish out the year, we have already begun the search process to fill that vacancy for next year. And just so I know the board knows, just so the public knows our process that we go through in selecting the next principal of a school, it's a pretty lengthy process. As soon as we learn of the vacancy at a school, we allow that principal to share, obviously, with the staff and parents and community. We post a position at the same time, and I say we, this is our HR department, Sam Marie Devon, in conjunction with the directors, either Darcy or Rick. We post a survey for the community members and staff to participate in. Additionally, Sam Marie goes out to each school and either kind of hijacks a site council or hijack a staff meeting to just kind of get some more input from parents and staff around what are some of those maybe desired skills and dispositions that you're looking for in the next principal. Once she collects that data and the survey closes, then she goes and combs through the applicants, and her and Darcy or her and Rick screens the applicants. She assembles two committees at each school, a committee of parents and committee of staff. She identifies some students at the schools as well, and the candidates will go out to the schools and interview with a group of parents and a group of staff on that same day. The lucky candidates will then have an opportunity to chat with Dr. Stubblefield and myself, and then, of course, we make the recommendation to the board. And so there's a tremendous amount of stakeholder input that goes into the next selection of principal. I was honored to be given the opportunity to host this year's All-City Choir Festival that took place last Tuesday evening. The Lawrence Public Schools All-City Choir Festival brings together the top performing choirs at our middle schools and high schools to meet in one collaborative ensemble led on stage by highly respected guest clinicians. So a special thank you to our guest conductors this year, Dr. Paul Tucker and Dr. Melissa Grady. Students work throughout the month of January at their individual schools on the pre-selected literature. Then they come together for just one combined rehearsal, and then it transforms into this amazing choir, this amazing memorable performance year after year. And I will put our choirs up against any choir in the country. I mean, they were truly outstanding. So once again, we're pleased to have that concert at the Lead Center, Lawrence's premier arts facility. I enjoyed shadowing Janice Hurst. She's Courtly School Crossing Guard. I did that on Friday morning at 19th in Vermont. Janice has been helping students cross for about 28 years. So consequently, some of the parents that now cross were once students crossing with their parents. And so she has 19th and she has Vermont. And so she's trained parents and students. If she's over here on 19th, you wait over there until she gets over there. But she does a tremendous job. She's very well respected. Parents and students just adore her. And so I do want to take this time to remind all of our community members, when you come to those crossing guards, please slow down. When you come to a school zone, please slow down. She was telling me about a time where she was out there with the stop sign and the car just rolled right by her. So please make sure that we are just spreading the word around slowing down in our school zones. We're pleased that the partnership of Lawrence Public Schools and Burt Nash Community Mental Health Center has been accepted to attend the Technical Assistance Systems Network School Mental Health Initiative Implementation Workshop this summer. So we will form a district and community leadership team to access cross-system school mental health processes and practices, identify priorities, develop goals, and discuss the mental health needs of the community. This work will lead to more informed decision-making and planning around improving mental health outcomes for all of our students, particularly those in need of or already accessing mental health supports. Staff and students over at LHS are moving into Phase 2 of the completed construction spaces. They're moving in this week, thanks to board members Shannon, GR, and Carol participating in a tour on last week of the former annex and the new building connector. I also appreciate Dylan Lyson and the Lawrence Journal-World photographer for taking the tour with them and sharing a great article and photos in Sunday's paper. My thanks to Executive Director Kathy Johnson for testifying before the Kansas legislature about how we spend our at-risk funds and how important those dollars are to meeting the unique needs of our students. The Kansas State Department of Education specifically asked Kathy to testify, and no doubt it was due to her wealth of experience and expertise. So I'm going to have to watch that and make sure they don't try to steal Kathy. Do want to congratulate our human resources staff for their work on this weekend's teacher recruitment fair. We had over 100 employee candidates attend. I want to thank all of our building administrators and district staff who assisted in conducting on-site interviews. They did an amazing job, and we've identified several candidates that we're interested in hiring for our team. It was a huge success. We heard a lot of positive feedback from candidates from other school districts out east, west, that in school districts in Johnson County. They were saying that this one was much more organized, and so, like I said, a lot of positive feedback, and most importantly, it's good that we had over 100 candidates that are interested in Lawrence Public Schools. So that's really just speaks to everyone wants to be a part of this team. We had about, I think, 70 or 80 last year, so that's always good. I attended the Lawrence Schools Foundation district-wide talent show last night, Ovation, at the Lead Center, and as usual, it did not disappoint. There were over a dozen performances from solos, band ensembles, dances. The Native American Student Services powwow dancers were there, and an acrobat that was on a net that scared me half to death. And what I call Little Beethoven. Matthew Lau, he was a 7th grader at Southwest Middle School. He performed Sonata Number 21 in C major. It's a Beethoven piece, and it's like a 10-minute piece. And normally when I'm at events and I like a song, I try to Shazam it, and it never recognizes it. I Shazammed it, and it recognized the Beethoven version. That's just how amazing this 7th grader was, and I understand he's won numerous awards. So that was really a proud moment. And so thank you to all those that attended. This is a fundraiser of our Lawrence School Foundation. Special thank you to Brian Haney for serving as master of ceremony and also being my co-ballet dancer as we opened up the show and brought the house down. I think that tutu that I had on would never be the same. As you're aware, we are celebrating 25 years, our 25th anniversary of the Lead Center's partnership with Lawrence Public Schools. And prior to the show on last night, there was a dedication of some newly installed lobby artwork that was created with the help of 3rd and 4th grade students here in the district and their art teachers. And so we had some art from every single elementary school in the district. And so the next time you're at the Lead Center, it's on the columns. It's wrapped. The columns are wrapped with the artwork, and some are hanging in the gallery, well, the lobby there. So thank you to our art teachers for working with our students and the Lead Center on this project. Congratulations to all 4 of our middle school teams, student teams from Southwest, Liberty, Memorial Central, West, and Billy Mills earned 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th places respectively at the 2020 Future Cities Great Plains Regional Competition. The teams also earned a number of special awards for their use of technology, design, models, presentations, surveying practices, just to name a few of those skills that were recognized. Next board meeting, we look forward to having Allie Martinez, a Free State senior, who's also the 2020 Boys and Girls Club Youth of the Year. So she will be with us February 24th. And congratulations to Charlie Maples, a Deerfield 5th grader, for winning the Douglas County Spelling Bee. That was super exciting. Just a reminder, Thursday marks the end of the second trimester for our elementary schools. Pre-K and K through fifth grade students will be out of school on Friday to give our elementary teachers time for recording and reporting of student progress in advance of next week's parent-teacher conference. So we hope to see all of our school families out next week during our parent-teacher conferences.
Okay, I changed my mind. I do have something to say. Two things. I wanted to say thank you to the Prairie Park scholars who wrote the awesome letters to us. I am going to write you back and make sure that gets to your school. So thank you. It was very heartfelt. I appreciate it. And I'd like to welcome Nathan Williams from Free State High School as our student board member. Welcome, Nathan. And you're treated like a regular board member here, with the exception of voting. But if you have any comments that you would like to share from a scholar's perspective, please don't hesitate and just kind of give Dr. Lewis a nudge or something.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you. And at this time, we have, do we have any patron commentary? No patron commentary, but welcome, everyone. I'm going to move that over to board commentary. Shannon?
Thank you. I wanted to share a little bit about what I've been up to since our last board meeting. I spent about 6 days in Washington, D.C. Over the last couple weeks, attending the National School Board Association's Equity Symposium and their Advocacy Institute. I also had the opportunity to serve on the Policies and Resolutions Committee for NSBA. So when we have our annual conference for the National Association in Chicago here in about 6 weeks, the delegate assembly there will be voting on the work that we did as a Policies and Resolutions Committee. So it's really glad to have that opportunity. I wanted to share that in conjunction with this meeting, NSBA does some of their business work in nominating their next set of officers, and I'm so excited to share that a representative from the board at Seaman School District, Frank Henderson from Kansas, is being nominated to be the next Secretary-Treasurer of NSBA, which puts him in line to be NSBA National President 3 years from now. So really happy for Frank, really excited to have that representation of our state at the national level. The Equity Symposium was excellent. This is the third year that I've attended. They had some really great sessions and some general session speakers. I was really pleased to attend a session on equitable access for all students around transgender students, and to see a lot of the practices and facilities changes that we have undertaken in our district reflected in the work that was being presented as best practices by the school district that was presenting at the conference. So that was really great to see. As part of the NSBA Advocacy Institute, I'm going to write up some information to share with the board. I just didn't have time to get it put together before this evening. The National School Board Association's Action Committee released a scientific poll that they did on support for public schools. There's some great data in there to use in our advocacy efforts. I will share a link with that. And also a brief synopsis of the visits that we had. I had the opportunity to attend and meet with Representative Sharice Davids and with Senator Roberts' staff, and also with Senator Moran and his staff. And the focus of our advocacy was really pushing all of our Kansas delegation to get behind the two versions of the IDEA Full Funding Act that have been filed. There's a Senate bill that has 14 co-sponsors in the Senate. There's a House resolution that has 139 co-sponsors. All of our delegation, I'm pleased to report, we're very supportive. It really comes down to, can they get the appropriations, can they get the bill passed, and then can they get the appropriations to put behind it? But we had some great information to share with them about just how dire the situation has become around special ed funding in terms of the obligation. The federal government is supposed to meet 40% of excess cost. They've been running around somewhere between 14 and 16%. The next budget cycle, that's expected to dip down to as low as 13%. That spills over into the state. Our state has committed to 92% of excess cost over and above what the federal government is supporting. Right now, they're at about 75% excess cost. That's expected to, or projected to be below 70% within the next couple of years. And so we made a big a big point of explaining that all of the things that they want public schools to do at the state and the national level, and all the programs they'd like to see us support, we could do a better job at all of those things if they would just do this one thing, if they would just put more money into supporting IDEA. So that's what I wanted to share about that. We've had a busy week otherwise with committee work. I wasn't able to attend, unfortunately, the policy committee meeting earlier in the week, but I did attend the facilities committee meeting with GR on Thursday. We had our full committee, executive leadership team, and also representatives of the design team and the Lawrence High leadership, all talking about where we're at with that project, moving from phase 2 to phase 3. We had a really great discussion about where we're headed and philosophy and processes to deal with some of the things that we've learned from phases 1 and 2. So I was really encouraged by that. And then we got to tour the work, as Dr. Lewis mentioned. I'm just so excited about those beautiful spaces, and I hope that our students and our staff are going to really enjoy them. I was struck, and I know Carol had a really nice quote in the paper about this, but I was really struck by just how beautiful some of those classroom spaces are, especially in the annex in that new area. Beautiful views of Louisiana, the transparency, the openness, the light. It's just, it was really nice to see. And then a couple other things. Wanted to mention that February 24th through 28th is Public Schools Week, and they provided us a nice flyer at my advocacy event about ways that you can tweet out your support or show your support for public schools. There's a website, www.publicschoolproud.org, and there's a lot of resources on there if you're interested in using those. And then finally, while all this has been going on, the legislature in Topeka has been busy with some good things and some not so good things. The two things I wanted to mention in particular that relate to our own district's legislative agenda. At-risk funds, it continues to be a huge focus of discussion. There's bills that have been filed kind of all over the place on that. One bill that actually would be very beneficial for us is Senate Bill 271. It had a hearing this last week, and it would repeal the sunset provision on the high-density at-risk weighting, which there's a lot to unpack there, but basically that's a provision in state law that's due to expire at the end of June this year. It's about a $425,000 hit to our district if that sunset is not repealed. So that was filed by Senator Hensley, and so hopefully we can encourage our delegation to support. I know that they're supportive of that, but we need to encourage people to be aware that that's out there. There's been several different bills filed, all relating around this at-risk audit that was done and how districts are spending at-risk funds. My take on them is none of them would be good for us, and so I'm hoping to follow that discussion closely, and I would encourage other board members to do so as well. And then the other big category has to do with protecting funds for public schools. There was a bill filed just yesterday or within the last few days that addresses the dark store theory of tax valuation. That's something we included in our legislative agenda. It was filed by Representative Phillips from the Manhattan area, and actually the Manhattan Board of Education passed a resolution at their last board meeting in support of this bill. It would basically write into state law that you can't use the valuation theory behind that in order to protect, to prevent valuation from being set artificially low for those commercial properties. And then there have been a couple different private school tuition credit expansion / voucher by any other name is still a voucher bill. And so I would encourage our communities to keep an eye on those and let your representatives know that public dollars ought to be committed to public schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. I don't know what we're going to do when you're no longer on KASB. I think getting the emails but actually hearing your perspective and extra details is always beneficial.
Well, I'll keep sharing as long as you keep letting me, so thank you.
Any other board members?
I'll just add real quick, sorry. The two things I did with Shannon this last week, the facilities committee, that large group, and the discussion that ensued, it was really good. It was a good reminder just to go through, you know, kind of where we've been and how we got there. I think Shannon and I will help. And when are we going to talk about that here?
Capital improvement plan and Lawrence High issues may come to the board at the end of February, second February meeting and/or
Yeah.
the March meeting.
So somewhere soon. So it was good to just to get that perspective and specifically to talk through what we've learned from phase 1 and 2 to prevent those things from happening and going forward, and to really spend some time talking about the nature of that work and how it continues to be a collaborative process that as we learn things, we continue to come to the table, and in some cases we have difficult conversations and we learn from them and we make decisions and we move forward. And so that was good. And then to be able to tour the new space on Friday was just exciting, just to see it and to continue to watch the transformation and to watch that building continue to slowly transform into a cohesive look and feel and you know, one of the main thoroughfares will be done for a short time until they close the middle to finish it off. But you know, when you think that you'll be able to walk in, for those of you who know Lawrence High, that you'll be able to walk in what was the outside door of the annex and be able to see all the way to where you walk out of the auditorium in one hallway. It was cool to be able to see that, and so it was fun.
I'm just going to piggyback off of Shannon and GR. I had a really good time touring my old school and watching it change and grow. But I was fortunate to take part in a Rightfully Yours panel at KU, and then we discussed voting rights. And I'm encouraged. Barbara Ballard was the moderator. So for me, it was cool to see, because she was on the school board when I was in high school. But we discussed how we, me as a school board member, how we as a board can encourage our children to vote.
Yes.
And even my own daughter, she voted in this last election. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So I've been involved in a number of things in the community since our last board meeting, but I'll just mention two of them. One was attending the school board breakfast at Sunset Hill. It was fun starting my day eating with the students. Learned a lot of cool things about art and things like that, and also had the opportunity to meet Principal Jeremy Phillip and third grade teacher Kathy Snyder. That was really fun, and I learned quite a bit. And also, last Wednesday, I was invited to Lawrence High School to speak with the Young Women of Color group. And we had a great conversation, great time chatting, eating breakfast, and talking about a lot of things, but mostly like self-care and leadership. So that was a fun thing to do.
There's one more thing I forgot to mention that relates to our upcoming agenda, and I apologize. Public Incentive Review Committee met on Thursday as well. The school board's representative on that joint city-county school district and community committee. We will see an item come on our agenda for the February 24th meeting, I believe, a request for the school district to approve a Neighborhood Revitalization Act request for a project at 800 Pennsylvania. If any of you read the newspaper article about that meeting, you would have noted that I made a big deal out of the applicant's request around a waiver of building permit fees. I just wanted to clarify, I voted in favor of granting the NRA at that meeting and making that recommendation to the City Commission, and that will be the recommendation that we get to vote on as a board. We don't get to vote on, as a school board, the city permit fee issue. So that project kind of checked all the boxes that is in the city policy for those types of NRA requests. However, I did think that it was an issue of fundamental fairness, the way the city has not consistently handled requests around building permit fees, particularly because we requested a waiver or a partial waiver for something on the order of $199,000 in building permit fees that we spent on the secondary bond issues, and we're told that they couldn't possibly grant that request because of all the costs associated with doing all of the inspections, but then they're turning around and granting these requests for some of these other projects. So I will continue to raise that as an issue of fairness, but I just wanted to clarify for everyone that that doesn't necessarily impact the particular issue that will come to our board for approval on February 24th. So, thank you.
You remember the, oh, it doesn't matter. Okay. Paula?
So what I've been up to the last couple of weeks, I attended the policy committee with Kelly, and part of that discussion was orienting me to the agenda and updates on our current work, such as the board operations handbook, bullying policies for teachers, social media, and I think that was it. Unless I'm forgetting something, Kelly, please jump in. I also had the opportunity to attend the Southwest Middle School Site Council, where the principal, Christy, she presented the data and really targeted towards Southwest Middle School, so I learned a lot. That's where 2 of my children attended Southwest, so it was really nice to see what was coming out of that. And we also had a presentation by Safe Routes to School, and they're asking parents to fill out a survey by February 19th. So their goal is to have a Safe Routes to School plan completed by the end of the year. There was also a presentation by the Student Council, just amazing. So they're just doing really great things with their students, and they also recognize themselves for being MLK Award recipients. So I also attended this past Saturday, Charting Your Course through middle school, high school, and beyond sessions targeted to those grade level students. This was sponsored at a no cost by Lead Horse and Mini Mox, which targets Native American students maintaining a healthy lifestyle. So Dr. Frida Gipp extended the invite to myself and Carol. She's with Haskell Indian Nations Universities, and her colleagues were inspired to host an event for local youth after their meeting in December of 2019. So this event was to share insights, provide information, and demonstrate support to help guide our students toward charting their course. Their goal is to initiate a support network within the community to assist students and their families. Their first event this last Saturday had 20 participants, and information was shared by current Haskell University students on areas of obstacles to success. They also talked about motivation, time management, uncertainty about their own future. One of the 2 young panelists shared their story, which was most common to Native American students, is moving from their tribal community to public school, especially to the Lawrence area. So 2 of the students talked about that experience and how Haskell was a great community network for them to really further their education. So they'll be holding other events that will focus on how to find tutors, looking for scholarships and leadership development. And again, this was not a program that, not a session that was funded by anyone or from any one project. So this was a group facilitated by Lead Horse and Mini Mox and Dr. Frida Gipp from Haskell.
Nice. Thank you. Yeah. Do you have any?
All right, no, I don't think so, yeah.
Great. And we didn't want to, Dr. Lewis already recognized our retirees, so that is why we didn't. But again, good luck on your future endeavors, and thank you for what you have done in this community, Mr. McCaffrey. And at this time, we are going to approve the consent agenda with an amendment.
Yes, I would like to propose an amendment to the consent agenda. I move the Board of Education amend the consent agenda to add Ann Hawks as the principal for Liberty Memorial Central Middle School, effective July 1st, 2020, and James Polk as the principal for Quail Run Elementary School, effective July 1st, 2020.
Second.
Smith,
Aye.
Kimball,
Yes.
Hill,
Yes.
Gordon Ross,
Yes.
Kadu Blackwood,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Johnson.
Yes.
The motion passes 7-0.
It always throws you off, like, which one will she call next? Thank you. At this time, we have a report, the district IDIA State Performance Plan and Annual Performance Report with Kevin Harrell, Executive Director of Student Services and Special Education, and I'll let him introduce his colleagues.
Good evening. Kevin Harrell, Executive Director of Student Services, Special Education. I have Laura Basham, Sheila Smith, and Lori Stetham with me, and they'll be a part of the presentation. Tonight, we are going to present our annual Special Education Compliance and Performance Report from KSDE. KSDE uses for their system to monitor schools, it's called the Kansas Integrated Accountability System, better known as KIAS. And within that system, they monitor special education for school districts. IDEA and OSEP, the Office of Special Education Programs, requires all states to create a state performance plan and look at indicators to determine how they are complying with state and federal laws. With that, a part of that is also it requires KSDE to monitor districts, and so Lawrence Public Schools, on these indicators and also post it publicly. So the reports that you received that look like this, you should have a state report and a district report. Those reports are posted online on the KSD website for the public to see. Let's try to show the information. The data is 2 years behind. So when you look at it, it'll say FY 2017, and then in April of 2020, we'll get 2018. But it's typically 2 years behind, so you'll see that as we start looking at data. What we're going to do is provide you with what the data looks like and some trend data on what it's looked like over time. The indicators that we look at, there's 17 indicators that the state looks at, and 14 are, the state looks at 17 indicators and 14 are what they look at for school districts. They start at early childhood, so that transition from early childhood, Part C, from that's birth to 3, to Part B, 3 to 21, that transition process, all the way through high school graduation, and then the transition and our post-school outcomes. As part of it, there's compliance and there's performance. So we'll look at performance data also that we receive. And we'll talk more about each indicator as we go through the presentation. So what you have in front of you is our graduation rate for students with disabilities. The state sets a target, which is the blue line. So we have a data table so you can also follow also, because there's lots of different lines, lots of numbers everywhere. State has set a target for a trend line for years. And then the purple is the state, but the yellow is Lawrence Public Schools. And as you can see that we're kind of up and down. One of the things that we know that we look in 2017 is when students graduate, they put exit data into the system. Some of the data was incorrectly put into the system, so Zach's working with the high schools to make sure that's clear, because what we have is some of our students that were graduated, but in our transition programs, they were not exited correctly, so it looks like they didn't graduate, but in fact they did. And so we're in the process of correcting that. And interesting enough, today we had an email from the state clarifying that many districts made that mistake, so we are working through that. Then we have student disabilities, and then we have District 497 of all students. And then also the state's district students with disabilities. So as you look at that data.
So Kevin, just to clarify what you just said about the Project Search and other students, does that only affect the data in 2017 for the coding, or would that carry back to the other years?
I think what we found is that in some of the changes, only was 2017, and we're looking at this last year, 2018.
Okay.
And so I'm not sure what that looks like. I know that we're working with the high schools to make sure that data is clear.
Okay.
That's correct.
So it's possible that 2017 was higher than what it's showing on here
Yes.
based on, okay, all right, thank you for that clarification.
The next slide is the dropout rate. Again, sometimes when you look, the state sets a target, but they don't always make that target either. But we do have some work to do as we look at our dropouts. The data, when we look at across the district, I think there was 144 students total, and 16 of those were special education dropout. And we are really working with our buildings as when Zach talked about the dropout data and graduation data before, we work with our building administrators, and they look at each one of those students. From special ed, we also work with our case managers, and we are looking at our transition process, because transition for special education we start that process at age 14, and really looking at that process and how do we keep students engaged and how do we make sure they have access to some of the things, looking at even as we look forward to the Career Academy and we look at CTE and certifications that students should have. So we're really looking at that transition process differently. The next is participation rate. And as far as the district-wide data, up in the top right-hand corner in red is all students at USD 497. That is the only data I had access to at this time. But looking at participation rates, ours is lower than we like to see. One of the things, and again, not excuses, we still have work to do, and we're working through this. We do know that a few years ago with LVS, there were a lot of parents, and I know there was a document there around, a lot of our virtual school parents were told they didn't have to do state assessments, they could just opt students out. So we know we had a lot of parents that opted their students out of state assessments. Our virtual school, Monty and Candy, have really been working diligently to help parents understand the importance of that. And so as we move forward, we're hoping to see, we expect to see better participation rates. Also, we work with each of our buildings. When you look at this data, we work at each of our buildings to try to figure out where we might need to support some buildings. I'm trying to, just to make sure that if it's a building has an issue or where it's working, what they're doing, and if it's not. But as we move forward, but we believe virtual school was a big part of this.
Can you talk a little bit more about the virtual school component? When you look at the difference between the outcomes for the students at our brick and mortar schools versus the virtual school, is there a significant difference in outcomes for students in the virtual school versus LHS or Free State when you're looking at dropout rates or any of the data?
Overall, yes, there is. I don't have the information to talk to you about specific details. I do know we've looked in the special education part of it, and a lot of the students are, some of our students, they may leave virtual school, but we don't know where they go, so they may not enroll in it, they may homeschool again, so some of those different things as far as finding students with the graduation, as far as the graduation rate.
Is there research on just generally because I'm just wondering, like when we look at our data comparative, and I'm not looking for explanations that are excuses, I really just am trying to understand the issue. Our data being a little bit lower than where we would want it to be, do we know the role of virtual school in that? Is there challenges for any virtual program when it comes to special education?
Yes, and my understanding is our virtual school is higher than most. And so we do know that it is a virtual school issue.
Okay, thank you.
Reading participation rate, this is pretty much the same.
I have a question. I don't know where it falls into to all of this. With some students who receive special education services, they also have the opportunity to go to summer school, or I think that was a thing before. Like, what qualifies?
Extended school year or something?
Yeah, extended.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Special education students, IEP teams, students qualify for ESY, and it's based on their special education services and looking at different aspects of whether they will regress or not and different things, but it's specifically based on IEP special education goals.
Okay. I was just wondering, like, and do you know, like, is there a way to more or less compare the students who have the extended school year versus those who don't, like to see if there's, I mean, are they performing?
Assessment?
Yeah.
We could look at it, but again, with ESY, it's specifically focused on focused on their special education individual goals, as opposed to some of the higher level. But we do have students that they are working on reading, maybe work on ELA and math.
That helps. Thank you.
And then performance. As you can see, that through the bottom is where we lie against the state and the state target, and then the students with disabilities across the state in Lawrence Public Schools. And then the black line up top is Lawrence Public Schools overall. And these are students that are scoring 3 and 4 on state assessment.
Kevin, when a student is categorized in the students with disabilities category, it's all students with IEPs for any learning disability or behavioral?
Any identified student except gifted.
Except gifted,
Yes.
okay. So it's the whole gamut from mild to our most severe,
yes.
all students, okay. Except for those students that have gifted IEPs, because we do gifted that way in Kansas. All right, thank you.
Because it is compliance, it's federal compliance, and it is students with disabilities, and gifted is not in IDEA.
Right, okay, thank you.
Then our reading performance. We still have work to do, but we are above the state's students with disabilities. When we look at our reading and our math performance, we are working closely with the curriculum instruction department, looking at how do we make sure students have access to curriculum, and so looking at instructional design, looking at curriculum resources, professional development, those type of things. We're just making sure students have access. Sheila?
Hello. My name is Sheila Smith, and I am one of the assistant directors. I primarily work with elementary buildings, and then specifically as it relates to this report, I also support our school psychologist and am one member of our team that supports all of these indicators that we've been reporting on. The next indicators that we're going to look at cover least restrictive environment, or LRE, as it's abbreviated in your handout. LRE basically is looking at where the child receives their education, and what we hope to see through LRE is that they're receiving their education with their non-disabled peers to the greatest extent appropriate. And appropriate is different for each student. So this is a decision that IEP teams make in looking at student needs and looking at the data. It's not an administrative decision, and it's not a district decision, but those are each individual IEP team for the students. When we talk about services for students with special education and IEPs, we talk about where those services can be provided. And this is the continuum of services that we look at. So a least restrictive placement would be providing services in the general ed classroom to students or in our community preschools. Then we also would look at maybe students receiving special education services in a special education classroom or a special education preschool. And then at the most restrictive, it would be a special school or possibly home instruction. Most of our students with IEPs and disabilities get a combination of services. So they're in the classroom, they may have someone push into the classroom to provide services, and then they may be pulled out for a portion of their day, but it's usually a combination. When we look at LRE, we'll first look at school age, so 6 to 21. And when you look at your handout, there's some language on there that isn't really easy to understand, and the first one is Reg Ed 80%. So what that means is that the indicator is looking at the percent of students who are inside the regular class 80% more or more of their day. So what we want as a state, the state has set the target as 67 or higher percent. So we want 67% of our students to be in the classroom 80% or more of their day. The state did meet that target at 68%, and Lawrence Public Schools also met that target. We're at 79%. So we are well above that target and well above the state. And I'll show you some trend data in a little bit that shows this is something that we consistently do well in. The next indicator is Reg Ed 40%. So this is looking at percent of students inside the regular class less than 40% of the day. So this is a number that we don't want to be very high. So the state sets the target at 7.3%, and we want to be below that. The state met that criteria, and Lawrence also met that, so we're at 4.32%, well below that. And then the last indicator is looking at a separate facility. So what percent of students are in a separate school? These may be students that are bused out of the district to a special day school or possible hospital placement. Again, we want this number to be small. So the target is 2.46%. The state has met this, and Lawrence has easily met this with 1.33%. If we look at trend data, and we just have trend data for that first one, so this is the percentage of students who are in their regular classroom 80% or more of their day, you can see that for the past 5 years, we have easily met that target. Lawrence Schools and Community has a long history of valuing inclusive education, and this data would show that.
May I inquire? I know this is just a small part. When we're talking about the percentage of students like receiving homebound and everything, how is the availability of homebound? I mean, I know it's probably like a small amount of students, I'm assuming.
Right now, I don't know that we have homebound students. We may have one. Okay. So, and that's is something that fluctuates through the year. It usually depends on, again, it's that IEP team decision, but maybe looking at, is that student able to attend school? Maybe they have a medical condition or another significant disability, and then we work to find those homebound instructors that can provide that special education service at home.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, good evening. I am Laura Basham. Brain just went blank. And I am Director of Early Childhood and Student Services, and I also work with some of our elementary buildings as well. I am going to focus on some of our early childhood data. So continuing with our least restrictive environment. When we look at our indicators that specifically look at our students that are ages 3 to 5. The first indicator here focuses on our students that are receiving a majority of their special education services in a regular early childhood program. That would be possibly some of our readiness classrooms that we have, that could be out in the community at some of our centers. We have several centers that we provide services in. When you look at the state target and the state scores, this is an area of growth for the state as well as Lawrence Public Schools. The state target is at 38.91%. The state did not meet that target. They're at 37.9%. And Lawrence Public Schools, we did not meet that target either. We are at 28.22%. So we have some work to do in that area. We will be talking about some action steps and some specific targeted steps as we continue some good work in this area. The next indicator looks.
I'm sorry, before you, can you talk, when you talk about, do you mean to say that you'll those steps that you're looking at that you'll talk about tonight in the presentation, or you're working on them as a group?
Well, yeah, we've got a slide that's coming
That's what I thought, the
on
last,
action
okay.
steps. And if
Yeah, I just want to make sure. I was
Okay,
it's
yes.
a little vague, so I want to make sure.
It's not
Yeah,
whole.
thank
We
you.
know it's an
Thank you
area
so
of
much.
need.
I appreciate it. Okay.
We're going to focus on that. Yep.
Great.
So then moving on, that's the second half of the slide, focusing on students that are receiving special education services in a separate education class. That is specifically looking at our students that are in our special education, early childhood special education classes that are at Kennedy. This number we want to be low. Unfortunately, we're not seeing it as low as we want to see it. State target is at 31.99%. The state did not get low enough either. They're at 34.58%. Lawrence Public Schools is at 42.33%. So again, an area of need that we'll need to do some targeted work with. Looking at trend data, this was for the top part of the last slide. We're looking at data from 2013, again to 2017. And this shows you a steady decline starting kind of at 2015. So we're digging into this data and looking to see what we can do to specifically look at our practices, make those individual decisions based on student need, according to their eligibility, according to their IEP paperwork, and not maybe focusing on a benefit, but actually looking at a need based on special education services.
What changed in 2015?
You know, that it's hard to say specifically what changed in 2015. Some things that could factor into that could be some personnel shifting that was done. There were some daycare centers that we had some closing of some daycare centers. The early childhood, some of the members of the early childhood team would say that the availability of spaces out in the community have lessened. So some of our students aren't having opportunities out in the community as much, could be factored because of financial reasons or just spaces that are available.
Did we also add capacity at the Kennedy programs?
We
Right
did
here.
add another classroom. I don't have the year that we added.
Around that time?
But that could have been a factor
Okay.
also, because
Right.
if you have a classroom, then based on need, and if you have kind of extra space and it's a benefit, and parents, we know that parents really come to us wanting preschool. And so trying to tease out, is it a need, a student need based on their eligibility and based on their special education needs? Where's the need and what is the benefit? And there's definitely a parent push of wanting preschool,
So
our special education classrooms.
I'm going to probably go back, I think it was one slide. And I appreciate your statement about how the state did not meet their goals. But we have a significant drop. And I was wondering, I know you said we're going to talk about action plans. Oh, we're significantly below, I don't know if it's a drop. Yeah, I do know.
Ways away, yeah.
But yeah, we're compared to where the state is at. So they're doing, I don't know, some schools or they're doing some things to get closer to that target. And I know you said you're going to talk about the action steps. I am going to hope or infer that they're going to be based around some things that maybe that's happening in the state.
We have had some of our early childhood staff members go and visit some regional areas that are performing a little bit better, and we are working to, it is an area in need, and so it is not just us. Some of our regional friends are also kind of asking the same questions and we're trying to problem solve with them, and what are you doing that works well? What are we doing that works well? And how can we kind of all work together?
Can you talk a little bit more, can you expand a little bit more on how what the role of community partners are in child education and our ability to meet goals? So can you talk a little bit about how that's either nonprofit or profit-driven, and how that impacts your ability to do your work?
I can give you my opinion.
That's fine. That's a good start, yeah.
Yeah, because I don't have actual data. I do know that childcare in the community, there are several nonprofit organizations, there are several coalitions around the area that are wanting more quality early childhood spots available for students, and not only more spots or slots for students to receive preschool or early childhood, but making sure that it's quality. I think one of the things that we, I think it was, I heard either Dr. Lewis or Darcy mention earlier, our outreach that is very important with getting into the early childhood community to not only talk about being kindergarten ready, but also there are early childhood standards, the Kansas Early Learning Standards, making sure that our centers are aware of the early learning standards, are the grandmas, the grandpas, the aunts and uncles, the neighbors down the streets that have our future students with them, making sure that they're aware of standards and aware of activities that can be done out in the community.
How does parents as teachers play into this?
Parents as teachers, so they play into this really awareness for parents, providing opportunities to come together, play groups, things like that. I don't know that we do have some overlap with some of our families and some of our students that participate in Parents as Teachers. Some of our students, actually quite a few of the students that we have as Tiny K, the 0 to 3. There's a continuum, and many of our students flow right into our 3 to 5 students. So as we look at strengthening those programs, whether growing those programs, strengthening the programs, and really outreach within the community will absolutely help with these. And I think also there's a factor of just awareness that our programs for special education are specifically for special education. They're for students with IEPs that have documented needs. That purpose is not preschool, a general ed preschool. Okay.
I will say that Eric and I attended an early care and education as workforce issue for Douglas County, and that was the trilemma, I guess, that we talked about there was centered around affordability, availability, and quality. And Eric, I think, researched some work that was going on at the Colorado Children's Hospital initiative that, so I say that, we're beginning to grapple with this as a county as well. So there's definitely some things that we're partnering with other agencies in the county to address this. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, so Dr. Lewis did a great job giving a summary, but it's like a task force for consisting of community leaders and community members about early childhood education and possibly trying to get more buy-in to by framing it as a business imperative or a workforce issue or economic development to really show the importance of early childhood and the impacts it has. Like when we see data, we see what happens when our students don't get the support that they need before they enter into school. So I'm really excited about it. I love doing research, so new project. So I'm really excited to really take a deep dive and see what other communities have done about this very important issue, and hopefully bring some of that here and customize it to what works best for our community.
Great, thank you.
I was kind of talking a little bit. I know, just being an educator in my district, one of the things that they were beginning to do, and I don't know where the funds are coming from, I can find out, is like having siblings, like preschool level siblings, and even if it's just once a week, coming in to using our parent facilitator, coming in with their, kind of like parents as teachers, but within the school that they will potentially end up at in kindergarten. And then from there, they're able to kind of see what skills they have, those basic skills, fine motor, gross motor, and then essentially being able to see whether or not they're going to probably need some help when they go to kindergarten, or at least begin to start laying that foundation of basic, letter ID, things like that. So I was wondering if we can like kind of look into that and see, would there be any buy-in or like people either within a community or the funds that can even go into that utilizing parent facilitators or of some sort. Because I think to my knowledge, there has been some benefit in that, especially as, not just the kindergarten roundup and you're like, hey, well, maybe this, student's gonna need some help, or, you can start recognizing and intervening even through those weekly sessions.
Absolutely. When we start looking, if we wait until kindergarten roundup, which is now happening this spring, we're not necessarily arming parents and community members with the information that they could be working on, some of those skills of even going to the playground and learning how to play with other students, how to navigate going down a slide and those types of things, zipping your coat, some of those basic skills that parents and community centers need some time to practice.
I know my son had attended Little Nations Academic Center, where that was 19 years ago. So I think some of those, I don't know where that program is right now, but since we are talking about community resources and potential community partners when it comes to early childhood, I think that would be one program that could benefit from resources in partnership with the district on what we're trying to do.
And right now, we have over 40 childcare centers within our district that we can, if we have students that are there that have special education services, that we do have providers that, if it is appropriate for services to be delivered in those centers, we do have providers that go out and they provide services. And so really also thinking about how can we expand and how can we collaborate? If we're out there for a couple kiddos providing some services, how are we collaborating to make sure that there's some carryover with some of the services, and then some useful strategies to maybe put in place for all students as well. That's a good point. Okay. So again, this is the trend data that we did look at, and the second slide for the trend data, again, shows you we had about that same time period, about 2015, where you see that yellow line going the wrong direction. And so again, followed the same year, so we're really kind of digging into some of the practices there. Now, on a good note, when we look at early childhood outcomes, all of our students, when they come to us, when they are ages 3 to 5, once they qualify for early childhood special education services, the teachers, actually teachers and teams, along with parents, do an assessment to see where the kiddos are, where the students are in the 3 areas that are on the slide, in the social emotional area, the knowledge and skills, and the appropriate behaviors. These 3 indicators here represent growth of our students from when they came to us to when they transitioned into kindergarten services. When we look at social and emotional, the state target was 86.75. State did meet that goal, as well as Lawrence Public Schools. We are at 96.97. Looking at knowledge and skills, the state target was 86.49. State met that goal, as well as Lawrence Public Schools. We are at 97.06%. And then looking at appropriate behaviors, things such as using materials correctly, independent functioning skills. State target was at 87.80. State met that goal, as well as Lawrence Public Schools. We met it at 94.12%. So the good news is, when we have our students, we are making great gains, and we are making gains above the state level of expectation. So we did meet in those areas.
I just one more question before you left.
Yep.
One of the things that we went to a community, a year or so ago, went to a community organized event around early childhood education. We talked about the disparities in what workers in early childhood education earn comparative to workers in other comparable jobs, even when you compare early childhood education teachers to our staff that teach, that are educators within our K through 12 environment. For the workers that USD 497 pays to provide these critical services that we know have perhaps some of the most return on the investment when you're doing it at an early age. In your assessment, for the board to know, are there areas in which our workers are not paid what they could be paid comparative to our other staff members?
Our early childhood special education teachers and related service staff are all certified teachers, and so they are paid at the level of all of our certified teachers. The paras that we have are also paid at the same rate as our paras. I think one would argue teachers and paras should always be paid more, but they are paid at the same.
So when an early childhood education professional comes to USD 497, they will be compensated at the same rate as our other educators and valued as much.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, they are paid just like a third grade teacher, early childhood teacher, a third grade teacher.
There's a couple areas where we could do better. Like parents as teachers, some of those folks could be paid much better.
Teachers are all paid as classified staff, so they are not on the
paras
certified
as well,
scale.
of course. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I want to make a correction. Some of our data initially with the performance data was incorrect.
Okay.
Talked about that.
We need it to stop moving. So as reported here, the performance data, this was an add-on. This information is actually the math data right here. So these numbers go to the math assessment data. And this data is actually the incorrect ELA data. Okay, so when I downloaded it, I combined accidentally performance categories 2 and 3 instead of 3 and 4. So this is incorrect ELA data.
Can you just send us corrected slides?
Absolutely.
Okay.
As soon as we're done, we'll get those corrected.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think at any rate, we're still below the state.
Yes, so the most important data points on these slides are actually the 3 lines below, where you're able to.
All the special education data is correct.
That data is correct. It was the add-on data.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Right. Now that we're playing ping pong with the slides. All right. I'm going to talk a little bit about parent involvement. And that's just the percent of parents with a child with a disability who report that they feel the schools are facilitating that parent involvement. When you look at your report, this is the one that has the state target on it. And then it says, what is our current data? And it says not applicable. And then it asks, did our district meet the state target? And it also says not applicable. The reason that is because the feds recently began the state to report to the feds if parent involvement was being met. So it's not reported at the district level, but they do include it on this public report. So we wanted to include it in our report and explanation to you. Statewide, we do know that there's a very poor response rate with the survey. So they are changing how we are able to send that survey out this year. One of the big things that they have done, and they received feedback from many school districts, is that they increased the collection window. So it used to be a pretty small window. We'll be able to send out surveys within the next couple of weeks, and that'll go through the end of the semester. So we'll be able to follow up with parents and hopefully get a better return rate. And before, the surveys were always mailed to parents, U.S. mail. And now they're allowing different collection methods, and we will be sending that survey out through email with a link so they can complete that online. So that should help our district as well as overall. Now we're moving into what is on your handout. There's some yellow indicators, and that's where Kevin was talking about. We've been reviewing results indicators, and now we're moving into compliance indicators. So the first one that we look at is timely evaluation. So IDEA requires school districts to complete evaluations within a certain amount of time. We have to complete those within 60 school days from the time that we received parent consent. So as a compliance indicator, this is 100% that we have to get on this. We did meet that. The state is slightly less on that, but in Lawrence, we were able to meet 100%. Another compliance indicator also deals with evaluations. This is dealing with students who age out of tiny K services, and the law says that we have to have that eval complete and an IEP in place by their 3rd birthday, and it is on their birthday that it has to be complete. So again, we are expected to be at 100%. We met this target, we're at 100%, and the state did not quite meet that.
Good evening. I'm Lori Stitham. I'm also an assistant director of special education. I work primarily with our secondary buildings, including our middle schools, high schools, and 18 to 21 programs, along with related service. I'm going to be talking a little bit about a couple of important areas, secondary transition and post-school outcomes. So secondary transition is also a compliance indicator that requires 100%. And secondary transition looks at the percentage of our youth IEPs that are 16 and above within that IEP year. And the requirements that we look at are appropriate and measurable post-secondary goals. Those areas that we look at for those post-secondary goals would be employment, as well as education and training, and then independent living. And so those post-secondary goals then drive the transition services. And what services does that student need in the area of transition to, once they leave us, be able to meet those post-secondary goals? Transition services being things like thinking about instruction, teaching self-advocacy skills, self-determination skills, goal setting, those types of things, in addition to community experiences like registering to vote, or daily living skills like time and money management, as well as transportation about the city. The next requirement would be that the annual IEP goals relate back to the student's transition service needs. So we want to make sure that those two things align so that we are giving every student the best possibility to leave when they exit the public school system, that they are able to leave us and meet those post-secondary goals that we've set. In addition to these 3 bullets, secondary transition also wants us to ensure that the student is actually invited to the IEP meeting to be a participant, as well as making sure that any relevant outside agencies are invited to help support that student as they transition from exiting the public school system to adulthood. As I said, this is a 100% requirement indicator. So the state target is 100%, and Lawrence has consistently met that at 100%. The state is a little bit below that, but this is an area that we consistently meet. The next indicator is post-school outcomes. And this is looking at the percent of youth who are no longer within the secondary school building. When they leave us, they have an IEP in place. And the measurement here is looking at these students within 1 year of leaving high school. And the things that we are looking at for measures in this particular indicator is the student enrolled in a higher education? Are they competitively employed? Competitively employed, thinking about that in terms of, are they employed with non-disabled adults making the same rate of wages for doing the same job? Or for some, are they enrolled in some other post-secondary education, maybe a vocational technical school, training program, or other employment that might look like self-employment or supported or sheltered employment. Some students may end up working for a family business, those types of things. Those would be included as well if those were aligned with their post-secondary goals. A little bit of data on this indicator. In this particular indicator, the state will survey students every few years, and that's how we are given that information. So this is just some trend data from going back to 2010. And as you can see, we have consistently met that indicator above the state target. 2010 was a little bit of an outlier there. We were at 100% for that year, but each of the 2014 and 2017 data indicating that we're just kind of right there, just a little bit ahead of the state target. About that? Thanks.
The next few slides are going to talk about disproportionate representation. Go a little bit over about how the state makes this determination. Basically, this is asking, is there a significant disproportionality based on race or ethnicity? And they look at identification of students as having an IEP, as well as discipline. So students who may have been suspended or expelled for more than 10 days in one school year. So the state has pretty specific criteria that they use to determine whether a district is considered to be significantly disproportionate. They use a risk ratio of 3.0 or more. What that means is if a district in Kansas we'll use an example of Black students identified as having a learning disability, let's say that risk ratio for that district is 1.5. That means in that district, Black students would have 1.5 times more, would be 1.5 times more likely than all other students to be identified as having a learning disability. So that's the first thing that they look at, is that risk ratio. And then they look at, does that district have a final risk ratio of 3.0 in one or more categories for 3 years in a row? It doesn't have to be within the same category, but any of those for 3 years in a row. This is what Kansas uses. This was approved by the feds. I think it took Kansas a couple of times actually to get the formula approved by the feds. So when we look at our disproportionality, we're first going to look at discipline and not consider race and ethnicity. So we're going to report on, is there a significant discrepancy in the rates of suspension and expulsion of all children with disabilities compared to all students without disabilities? So the target for that is 5% or less. The district was at 0.16%. So we easily met that and did meet, overall, the state also met that target. Now we start looking at, what about looking at suspension and expulsion rate considering race and ethnicity? The district asked a question, so you're looking for no's here. It says, is there a significant discrepancy? No. And the state also was a no. So we met this target as far as discipline. The last areas that the state performance plan looks at for districts is disproportionality as far as students identified for special education. So does Lawrence have a disproportionate number of students identified as having a disability? And that can be one of the 13 disabilities that we look at. Lawrence does not. We met that target, as did the state. Then they take a look at each one of those disability categories, and they ask, is there a disproportionate number of students identified for any particular disability, such as a learning disability or a cognitive disability? Again, for Lawrence, that answer is no, so we met that target as well as the state.
In the end, what the state determines a level of determination for a district. And that's based on the 9 compliance indicators that have to be 100%, that's a yes or no. And as you can see, for Lawrence, in the far right has been our level of determination over the years. As you can see, there are some times where there's needs assessment. There's 4 levels. So there's needs requirement, needs assistance, and ours is in the timely and accurate data column. There was one situation where we didn't get, a student didn't exited special education. We didn't get the information correct to the next year. That one student made us non-compliant for timely accurate data. And looking at some of our systems. So we are working with our data clerk and working with our power school, and also working with the state to try to figure out ways that we can make sure we can see the data before and find ways we can kind of root those things out before we actually send the data. But so in 2017, we are in needs assistance. And then as far as when we look at all of our indicators over the years, when we compare this year to last year, 14 of the 7 indicators as a district, we made progress. The ones we did not make progress were in early childhood, the 2 indicators in early childhood, and then the graduation rate. And then looking at next steps and moving forward. When thinking about our outcomes on our state assessments, really working with our curriculum and instruction department to look at more access for our students with disabilities to our access for curriculum, whether that's instructional strategies, lesson design, professional development. We also review all of this data by building to see where buildings lie and offer assistance in the building if it's a particular building as needed. And we continue to support our CI3T, our intervention, during interventions, because that prevention is before they become to special education. And really looking at our secondary transition process. When we think about our students that aren't graduating and students that are dropping out, we start transition at age 14 in Kansas. And it really is, special ed is a bit different. It's kind of like an individual graduation plan for years. That's kind of what that process has been. We're working with KU and Dr. Sjogren looking at our transition process and making sure that we're trying to make sure students are engaged. We're looking at the Career Academy, different options for students to have a purpose, be engaged, and looking at certificates and different things for our students. So that transition process really helping students plan out what they want to do and getting them there. That's something we're working at. About professional development.
Okay, when we think about professional development and next steps, there are some layers to professional development. We need to focus on, or we are looking at supporting our building administrators, using some of the tools that we have available for administrators, DigiCoach, using some of our instructional snapshots to provide some observable behaviors that some of our building principals can actually go in and see and provide very explicit feedback on for teachers. And not just special education teachers, but general education teachers as well, because students with disabilities, the onus is not just on our special education staff, it is on all education, it is on all of our educators. And so really arming our principals with information of how to ask the right questions and how to support our staff. Also working with our general education teachers and really differentiating core, meeting the needs of all students, designing lessons, designing the environment so that all students can be successful in those environments, in their environments in general education, and also our special education staff. We're utilizing some of our specialized collaboration time on Wednesdays, some of our district PD time, and we're focusing on appropriate and meaningful inclusion at all levels, starting at early childhood all the way through. We're also looking at reviewing our evaluation and our initial placement or placement decisions, the placement process. As Sheila had said earlier, these decisions are all individualized, they all happen at team levels, and they are all student focused. So making sure that that teams are focusing on student needs. That is one of our next steps. In early childhood specifically, we have established a group that is specifically looking at least restrictive environment. They're looking at the data that we went over tonight. They're analyzing their practices. They're looking at areas to strengthen. They're going out to other communities or other districts and trying to figure out what's working well for other areas and how we can bring some of that information back so that we don't have to recreate the wheel. Some of our other next steps, we have a resource special education teacher leadership team, and we have teachers that are representative from each of our buildings, starting at kindergarten through high school. And this is a working group that's really focused on looking at some of the issues, problem solving, kind of some of the realities that are happening with some of our some of our special education teachers. So we can help kind of problem solve and work through some of those things. And then also focusing on empowering that group to really strengthen instructional practices. So where are some of the hiccups? What are some of the obstacles that they're running into? And working with them to maybe help design things differently, support them a little bit better so that they can make effective decisions and ultimately increase the student outcomes. And the last next step that we're going to highlight tonight is our Parent Advisory Committee, or our LCAC. This is a big success, I think, in our area. This is a parent-led committee. It is in its second year this year. We have major growth that has just happened. We have 19 out of our 21 schools represented. In the past, there have been maybe 4 to 6 schools that have been represented, or people that have been consistently attending. So very excited about our parent involvement. And this group is really, it's functioning as a communication and advocacy group. And we're really focusing on that transparency with district services and educating our families. They've been planning parent trainings. We've had a couple parent trainings that have been very well attended. They're looking at parent handbooks, and really this group, these parents, are working to wrap around each other and also help improve the experience for all of our parents as they're supporting students with disabilities. So it's been a very good collaboration for us.
We have always looked at our practices when I think about our evaluations and making sure that the tests we use don't have cultural bias, and making sure that we're looking at different things when we're looking at the evaluation process and education of students. And also, even though this doesn't cover gifted, as far as some of the compliance issues, as far as the 90-day completion, those type of things, that does. They do a gifted file review on, and so that information applies to gifted also.
Kevin, regarding the Parent Advisory Committee, I don't know how to facilitate this exactly, but it would be nice to hear from them, either if it's easier for us to come to them or for them to come to us, to hear about their process, their advocacy, and just their personal experiences with the district. So I don't know which of you is facilitating that exactly, but if you would bring that invitation back to that group, it would be helpful. And then
They did mention coming to.
Okay.
The co-chairs did mention coming to, and they weren't sure to do that during
if they want
comment or.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great to have a designated time for them, so they don't have to have 5 minutes to tell us their experience. So maybe to work with Dr. Lewis to think through a time when it would fit for them to come to the board during a work session or during an agenda, a time when it makes sense for them.
And you are invited to attend.
Yeah, I mean, if that's easier for them, I'm sure we would much, but I don't want to, depending on how the committee works, I wouldn't want to be
Maybe with the
intrusive.
committee chairs, since it's most of the members are new, just last meeting, so the committee chairs can talk to you about their experience
Okay.
over the last year.
Okay, I appreciate it if you extend that. Thank you.
We can do that.
Thank you. Questions?
Other questions?
I'm trying to decide if I should share this or not. So back in early January or December, I attended a meeting just to hear what paraeducators are doing in special education areas. And I think what's being reported here is different than what I have in my notes based on their experiences working with the district. So I agree with Kelly that we definitely hear their voices, so that maybe the next steps might look a little different. Paras and parents who attended that meeting. So, I mean, I've got pages full of notes here. But yeah, I would strongly encourage
The
that.
the facilitators, they will come and they can talk to you about the experience.
Okay.
Any more questions? Thank you. Thank you. Okay. We're going to go into executive session, but before we do, I want to thank Nathan for coming out and representing as a scholar school board member, and thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.
At this time, I move the Board of Education recess to executive session to protect the public interest in negotiating a fair and equitable contract, to discuss negotiations pursuant to the exception of employer-employee negotiations under COMA with Dr. Anthony Lewis, Dr. Anna Stubblefield, David Cunningham, and Kathy Johnson to be invited to be present, with the board to return to open session in this room at 8:07. That's 20 minutes. 8:12, 25 minutes, yeah. with possible action to follow.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
For 10 minutes ending in 8:24.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
like worst case scenario. So. Oh my gosh, it's cold. Yeah.
Shannon, are they talking at all about like a specific?
We have to move to adjourn. Do we have any announcements?
No announcements? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Oh, second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Sorry, Kelly.
I was just wondering about whether they've mentioned, so it's not on the table at all, you don't see it coming down the